Hello, AP Bio folks. Today we are starting our second unit of class, and this unit is on ecology. We did a little bit of ecology in the first unit when we talked about energy pyramids and trophic levels and primary productivity and those things. But we're going to go a little bit deeper into ecology now and get to some of the other topics. So today's going to be kind of an introduction, and we're actually going to start with an activity that in class we would complete kind of as some stations. So I'm not going to talk too much through this first part. You're going to see a series of images and questions, and you're going to have some questions to answer about them. This is mostly review, and it's kind of part of your notes for this unit. So be writing this down in a notebook. If you get things wrong, go ahead and go back and correct it. But this is kind of the introduction to ecology and a review of a few things that you know a little bit about already. We may have done this already once, and then the word under my picture down there says organelles. This next station has to do with biomes, which are kind of the major life zones on Earth that are primarily defined by their climate. So we're going to look at 3 different diagrams as you look at this. Just so you know, you do not need to memorize all the different biomes and their precise plants and animals and temperature and everything, but you should have a general idea in your head of what each biome is like. So when I say desert, you probably have an image in your head already of somewhere that's hot and dry and has cactuses and lizards and things like that as kind of the dominant life forms. That's what you need to know. For every biome, you need to have kind of a basic picture in your head of what that's like. So the main things you need to write down in this part are the factors that affect the location of biomes and just some basic descriptions of the biomes that you're less familiar with. So like I said in here, you do not need to describe every single biome. Focus on the ones that you are less familiar with what they are. You don't need to write descriptions of, say, the desert, if that's one that you're pretty familiar with. Aquatic biomes are something that I just want you to be a little familiar with. Again, this is not vocabulary that I will test you on. I just want these words to be something that you have heard before. Aquatic biomes obviously are not characterized by temperature and precipitation like a terrestrial biome, but they're characterized more by the physical environment, so the temperature, the depth of the water, the amount of light they get, and the chemical environment, whether it's freshwater or a saltwater area. So study that picture at the right for a little bit and just think about what those different words might mean, and take a look briefly at some aquatic biomes. Again, this is not information that you're responsible for memorizing. I just want you to look through it once so you have an idea that there are aquatic biomes that exist, just like the terrestrial ones that you're more familiar with. So you can make a chart like this in your notes. And then in the question here, you will see a list of factors to kind of sort into these different categories. All right, now we're going to switch back over and talk through a little bit of notes together. There's only like 4 slides here today. The Unit 2 notes are attached in the class materials, as are the prior knowledge. If you want to go back and review kind of the things we've already learned about some of the topics in this unit, and the new content, learning targets, and vocabulary words. So all of that is available for you in Google Classroom, so you can start looking through the information for this unit as we study it. Today we are starting with chapter 40, the first part of this. So one of the things that you did is you went through and put a bunch of words in order. When we study ecology, we're really just looking at the higher levels of organization in biology, kind of starting with one individual organism, like here we have a pelican. If you have a bunch of organisms that are all the same species, so a group of pelicans would be called a population. All of the other living organisms that interact with that pelican would be the community. So the community consists of all of the biotic components of the ecosystem. Sorry, it takes me a little while to write with this, and I'm really messy. When you take all of those living things, so all of the birds as well as all of the insects and the fish and whatever else in this ecosystem, and add in the abiotic factors, the water, the sand, the temperature, the precipitation, then you're talking about the ecosystem. So I'm not going to write the whole words this time, but ecosystem is biotic and abiotic factors interacting. And there are obviously many, many ecosystems that together make up the biosphere, which is kind of the sum of all of the living things on the planet. So when we study ecology, we're really looking at these top levels. We're looking at how organisms interact with other living things, like other pelicans or other organisms around them, the things that they eat, the things that might parasitize them, anything like that. And we are also looking at how living things interact with the non-living components of their ecosystem. We're going to start by focusing our study on the level of populations with a little bit of population ecology. So we're thinking about that group of brown pelicans. And this diagram kind of shows the factors that can affect populations. You can see there are two arrows that are coming in and two arrows that are going out. And so obviously a population can be made larger if new members are added through births. So that's this first arrow here. And members can be removed if there are deaths in the population. The bottom two arrows, again, sorry for the super messy handwriting here. The bottom two arrows represent members of a different population that fly in and join these birds here, or that fly out. So this represents immigration and emigration, which is the opposite of that. So immigration is new individuals moving in, and I'm just going to abbreviate that. And emigration is individuals moving out. Because when we talk about a population, we're really just talking about the individuals of the same species that are within the same area. They interact with each other, they might mate with each other, they compete with each other for food, all of those types of things make up a biological population. When we describe a population, there are a few different characteristics we can talk about. We can talk about population density, which is the number of individuals per unit area or volume, depending on whether you're talking about, little single-celled pond creatures, you might talk about per unit volume. If you're talking about birds, you might talk about how many of these sparrows per acre there are, something like that. Usually scientists do not actually go around and count every single individual of a population. They take small samples and use that to kind of extrapolate the density of the population. And this results, the density of the population results from adding and removing individuals, as we saw in this, as if the birth rate and the immigration rate are very high, the density is going to increase. If there's a lot more deaths and emigration, then it's going to decrease. We can also talk about something called population dispersion, and that's how spaced out the individuals in a population are. Here you can see diagrams of three different patterns of dispersion. This one with the starfish is called a clumped dispersion pattern. You have these little clumps of individuals. Starfish tend to kind of hang out on top of each other and clump together like that. These penguins are fairly evenly spaced, so you have a pretty even distribution here. And these flowers in the meadow are fairly random. The seeds were carried by the wind and just landed there. So they have a pretty random distribution. The type of dispersion that a population has sometimes is affected by factors in the ecosystem. If there happens to be a cluster of nutrients or food in certain places, you'll get kind of this clump dispersion pattern. If individuals are, say, defending their territory, like these penguins are all defending like their little 2 square feet of space, you get a pretty even distribution. But if there's no competition and resources are distributed fairly evenly, then you get this random distribution pattern. There are other ways that we can look at populations as well. These are just a couple of examples. This is called a life table that kind of follows one cohort of individuals throughout their life and gives statistics about how many are still alive at the start of each year of their life, and the death rate at that age and the number of offspring they're having. So you can kind of look and you can see most of these individuals, a large portion of them did not survive the first year. The death rate kind of starts high and then becomes fairly steady through the middle portion of their life until they get to be about 8, 9, 10 years old. And they tend to reproduce the most around ages 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of right in there. So that gives you some other statistics about a population. This last way to look at a population is called a survivorship curve. And if you look at the X and Y axis here, the X axis just gives us the percentage of the maximum lifespan. The reason it just gives this as a percentage is because the lifespan of a groundhog or whatever this is not the same as the lifespan of a person or the lifespan of an oyster, but it's saying from birth to death, when do these individuals tend to have the highest mortality rate? And so our y-axis here gives us the number of survivors. So you can see, for example, for humans, most of them survive their childhood. When they get to about halfway through their life, this is about the 50% mark, most human beings are still alive. It's not until we get older, towards the end of our life, that all of a sudden the percentage of survivors starts to drop off drastically. So this shows that with individuals like humans, most of them survive through childhood and middle age, and most people die when they're older. Other types of things, like these oysters, many of them die when they're very young. They have a very high mortality rate when they're young. And you tend to see that with things like insects that produce thousands and thousands of offspring. Lots of them die before they even get very far in life. And then it kind of levels off after that. And other types of species like this groundhog have a fairly steady mortality rate throughout their entire life. So here's one more example. So we're going to continue looking at populations tomorrow as well. And tomorrow we're going to get into some different types of population growth and look at some mathematical modeling of population growth. So for homework tonight, I would like you to watch a crash course video. It's about 11 minutes long that introduces two different types of population growth called exponential and logistic population growth. These are going to be important concepts to understand before we start class tomorrow. So please take a little while and watch this video. Take some notes, particularly on those two types of population growth, but you can also listen for the terms that are listed at the bottom of the screen as well. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I will see you again tomorrow.